The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on when you're calling in from, and welcome to a heavy and important and extremely timely topic. We're going to cover what's to come in the post-Roe world, which could be any day now. So first we'll introduce your hosts. First voice you're hearing is Erin Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm co-founder and executive director of Reproaction, and I'm based in Washington, D.C., and you can follow me on Twitter at Erin to the Max.
And this voice is Caitlin Blenny. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the outreach and culture manager at Reproaction, and I'm based in Alexandria, Virginia. And you can follow me on Twitter at liberaljane with 2 E's.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So here's our agenda for today. We'll introduce Reproaction. Caitlin will give us an overview of abortion access in the United States and what's to come. And then we'll dive in for a panel discussion. We're really honored to be joined today by two experts on the ground and in the field. First is Mivy Jensen Fellows with Trust Women, which has abortion clinics in some of the key battleground states. And then also Lauren Polk, an expert from If, When, How, lawyering for reproductive justice. So super excited to be joined by those folks. Then we'll cover next steps and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Few things. One, if you are a live tweeting type, feel free to do so. This is an open forum for that. So we encourage you to use the hashtag Reproaction, but just getting the information out there is great. So feel free to do that. Second, I'm going to answer our most commonly asked question, which is, will there be a recording of this webinar? Yes, and we will send it to you. And then third, with regards to questions, if you have questions for Caitlin or for Mivy or for Lauren, just put them in the questions tab whenever you have the question. You don't have to wait, and we will get to as many questions as possible at the end. So with that, I'll introduce Reproaction. Reproaction leads bold action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're deeply proud of our left flank analysis, and we're known for our willingness to hold folks on all sides of the issues we work on accountable, whether they're traditionally considered allies or opposition. And we have a commitment to nonviolent direct action as one of the tools in our toolbox. I will also parenthetically state in introducing us that Reproaction has been a leader on getting out the word about self-managed abortion with pills, and we have been doing this work for a very long time. In fact, we have been doing it since prior to when Brett Kavanaugh was mentioned as a potential justice on the Supreme Court. So I want to be very clear that we will be discussing self-managed abortion as part of this conversation. It's not the entire conversation, but it's part of the conversation. And what I want to be very clear about is that self-managed abortion with pills is safe and effective, and we see it as an important part of the future of abortion access, not merely as a method of last resort or just something in response to abortion being restricted. And that also, as we emphasize that work in our organization, we deeply stand with abortion providers, and we would like to see abortion providers and community-based abortion care available in every community in the United States. So it's not an either or for us. And with that, I am very pleased to pass it over to Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Erin. So I'm going to go through a little bit of what is currently happening and what we anticipate will happen before we get into our panel conversation. So last month, there was a leaked opinion that showed that the Supreme Court will likely overturn Roe v. Wade this June, which means the question of abortion legality will be put back to the states. In the immediate, we know that 22 states have trigger laws. That means abortion will be immediately banned there. And there are another 4 states that will likely follow suit. So with that, we are looking at about 26 states losing complete abortion access and more than half of the country now being without access. I want to emphasize, while this is a draft opinion, abortion is still legal for now, but we know legality has never ensured abortion is accessible. And further, we've also seen, in response to this decision, Oklahoma become the first state to enact legislation with this Supreme Court leak in mind. We'll talk more about that later with Mivy, but I mention it now to say that there are already many areas of the US that are operating in a post-Roe landscape. Further, we know Roe never fulfilled our vision of abortion access and liberation. And even before these attacks that we're seeing now, there were many in our communities who were unable to access care because of the barriers such as cost, distance, as well as other logistical issues. We anticipate that this decision will come at some point this month or in early July, and know that there'll be a large fallout from this decision. So if we could go over to the next slide. So in particular, I mentioned those 26 states. For us moving forward, I think it can be helpful to think about the way people will be accessing in-clinic abortion care as a regional issue. So in particular, on this map, the states that are in that orangey red color, and I should also mention this is a map from the Guttmacher Institute, those states that are in red will lose access to abortion. Those are states where abortion will be banned. And the states in blue aren't necessarily states that have abortion protected, but are the states that will, many believe, will become destination states. And so we'll talk more about destination states, especially Kansas, and the importance of that in our panel discussion, but I want to share this from the offset to get us thinking in this way. In addition, just because a state on this map is blue doesn't necessarily mean abortion is accessible there. So in particular, for example, the Southeast, we see that most of the states that represent the Southeast will be banning abortion in light of this decision, which would make North Carolina, for instance, the closest state with an abortion clinic. However, North Carolina, for instance, has a 72-hour waiting period, which means if someone was to travel, there are other barriers that they would likely encounter while trying to get that care. So that might be having to find a hotel or transportation or taking time off from work. And those logistical barriers can really compound on each other and push in-clinic care way out of reach for many in our communities. Further, while we don't have the decision just yet, we do have a general idea of what will happen based on the fallout of Texas's SB 8. So in September 2021, Texas banned abortion after 6 weeks. And from that, we saw two things happen. We saw many Texans going hundreds, possibly thousands of miles to access the abortion care they needed in other states, such as Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, while they were still offering care, and beyond. What we also saw was a large increase in the demand for abortion pills. So if we go over to the next slide. So unlike before Roe, we now have technology, the technology of abortion pills, which means people can safely and effectively manage an abortion on their own outside of a clinical setting. But that's not to say that self-managed abortion doesn't carry risks. It's important to note, though, the risks associated with self-managed abortion are not medical, they're legal. And this makes sense, of course, because we know the logical consequence of abortion bans, and the goal of the anti-abortion movement is to send pregnant people to prison. And that's already been happening in Black and Brown communities and low-income communities for decades. We know that the criminalization of pregnancy outcomes is not new, but will likely worsen in this political environment. If we go in the next slide. As more and more people look outside the formal healthcare for options, it is so important that we get the word out about safe and effective options for self-managed abortion, and that, of course, includes self-managed abortion with pills. Here at Reproaction, we are making a habit of sharing the World Health Organization's protocol for self-managed abortion with our communities and bases, and we offer the full protocol on our website alongside fact sheets and other materials. And I highly encourage you to familiarize yourself with the protocol before this decision drops. We can go over the next slide. So what are we doing in the lead up to this decision? As Erin mentioned, we've been preparing for this moment for a long time. We actually held a webinar with a similar name in 2018. And in that time, we've been organizing our communities, mobilizing, and working to make sure people have access to the information they need. So some of the things that we've been doing are information shares with the World Health Organization's protocol for self-managed abortion with means of hostel, both virtually and in person. We've done them in front of the Supreme Court. We've done them in people's houses. Anywhere people want the information, we are willing to show up and share it. We are also building and creating resources to spread the word about self-managed abortion with pills so people can take action in their own communities and the spaces that they occupy. And then, of course, the last thing is shifting the culture around self-managed abortion and busting stigma through local direct action and organizing. We're getting out in our communities and making sure we're having those conversations, and we're making sure that people know that there are options post this decision with the Supreme Court. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to Erin, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And I'm super proud and pleased to introduce our first panelist, who is Mivy Jensen Fellows. Mivy uses she, her pronouns and serves as Advocacy Director for Trust Women and Board President for the Trust Us Justice Fund. At Trust Women, she advances access to abortion care in Kansas and Oklahoma through grassroots programming and legislative initiatives. Mivy holds a master's degree from the University of Chicago, and she has researched and written on the intersections of religion and gender. Previously, Mivy worked internationally to provide critical services for women and girls. In her spare time, Mivy enjoys quiet walks with her dog, Tila, and so glad you have Tila at this time, Mivy, and really want to just express profound appreciation for the work that you're doing in Kansas and Oklahoma, two extremely critical states in the abortion access battle. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. So my first question for you, let's just go straight to the nightmare, and that's Oklahoma's strict abortion ban that just went into effect. Can you tell folks more about that and how that has impacted abortion access for your patients? And I'd also just really appreciate, to the extent that you can also explain not just what the ban is and the fact that it takes place at fertilization and what that means, but also the impact that it's having on Trust Women as a provider.
Absolutely, and that's a really great question. So House Bill 4327 was introduced into the Oklahoma legislature this session, and it passed through and was signed by the governor into law last week. It is a total ban on abortion from the point of fertilization, as well as has the private right to enforcement. So as many people have probably heard of the SB 8 ban in Texas, this is a very similar bill, except it is a total ban on all abortion in the state, and has this private right to enforcement, meaning that citizens can bring civil suits against providers and those who are presumed or thought to have assisted in a pregnant person seeking and receiving an abortion in Oklahoma. There are some very limited medical exceptions, but we also recognize that exceptions can be very problematic and difficult to even achieve or receive for people. So what this total ban has meant is that Trust Women, as well as the other providers in the state, have stopped providing abortion care because we are unable to legally. This has caused many difficulties for patients in Oklahoma, as well as those who are coming from neighboring states to receive this essential health care. Trust Women in Oklahoma opened its doors to patients coming from Texas after SB 8 passed last year, and across all providers in the state, we saw a 2,500% increase in the number of people seeking abortion care in Oklahoma. So as a result of the most recent ban in Oklahoma, patients who would otherwise be in the state or coming to the state are needing to go further afar to seek this essential health care. And while, it is certainly possible for some people to travel to neighboring states like Kansas, where Trust Women has a sister clinic and is expanding capacity to see as many patients as we possibly can, we also know that to travel to receive this health care is impossible for many people, and that is devastating. So Trust Women is trying to be very clear. Our clinic has not closed in Oklahoma. We are still there. We are still answering the phone and trying to support people in what ways we can. However, we are not providing abortions in Oklahoma. We are assisting people in traveling to other states like Kansas, where they can receive this care, and are working to connect people with practical support, be it, assistance in how to plan your travel, how to manage the funds that are needed to pay for the abortion or pay for the travel to get to this clinic. While we recognize that there are other logistical barriers that people face as well. So people, the majority of our patients who come are actually already parents. The national average is about 6 out of 10 patients who are seeking abortion care are already parents. Trust Women finds that 7 out of 10 parents that we see, patients we see, are already parents. So childcare is another important aspect of being able to receive this healthcare, so that patients know that their child is being taken care of while they seek this healthcare. So as I've mentioned, what's happening in Oklahoma, I can also speak to what is happening in our Kansas clinic, where we've actually been preparing for this for a long time. We have experienced stops and starts to legality in other points in time, including during the pandemic. So we have been working to expand capacity in our Kansas clinic through, renovation and increased physician shifts. What we know is that we are one clinic and there are only so many hours in the day. And so while we and other providers in the state are doing what they can to ramp up to be able to see as many people as possible, as we look ahead to the loss of Roe, we know that this will not be enough. One of the major barriers that patients are facing is being able to get an appointment. When one state loses access, like what we are experiencing in Oklahoma, is that the need for abortions does not stop. There is just a greater demand on more limited appointments. So it is vital that we continue to expand services where we can as we fight for relegalization in places where we have lost access. Erin, did I answer your question? Is there anything else that you wanted me to speak to on that?
No, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much, Mivy. And just, I hope everyone is taking notes and really understanding. And I want to underscore the importance of what you just said, that the fact is this is just longer wait times for appointments, and it's an enormous backlog. And I really appreciate how you also just said, as we work to win back access in places where it is being lost, what is happening right now, and I want to underscore that, what is happening right now is horrific. But it is not the end, and no one is accepting it as the new status quo. And the advocates on this call, and I know reproductive health rights and justice activists around the country are fighting like hell so that we can actually get the access that never existed before at the level that we need. So be clear-eyed about that. One just follow-up question I do have is, can you talk a little bit more about the fact that it's actually a ban that takes place at fertilization? Because this is just another bananas thing to lift up, I believe, because isn't that before pregnancy even takes place? Is this in effect a personhood style ban combined with a Texas style enforcement?
That's a good question, and I will be upfront. And I think all providers are really trying to figure out the legality of all of this, and how all of this is actually going to work out, because this is new and unprecedented. This is, I would say, the most extreme ban that we have seen in this country thus far. It is certainly part of what we are witnessing as the criminalization of pregnancy in a variety of ways. We know that there are people who are already in jail for having miscarriages in different states. And so this is the extreme nature of this ban is horrifying and terrifying, and it is part of this overarching strategy to criminalize pregnancy and those who can become pregnant.
Thank you for that. And we will talk about criminalization much more. Caitlin will lead that discussion with Lauren. So I'll move to the next question. And if you could talk about, and I'll just say at the outset, so I co-founded Reproaction with Pamela Merritt, who served as co-director of Reproaction for 5 years with me before she went on to become executive director of Medical Students for Choice. And one thing that Pamela and I were always very clear about in our analysis of starting Reproaction is that we centered the Midwest and Upper South, and abortion access in those areas in particular. And for a long time, I think folks didn't really understand how important the Midwest was as a battleground for abortion access. If you could talk more maybe about which communities in the Midwest, including Kansas and Oklahoma, but which communities in the Midwest are facing the brunt of abortion restrictions today?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And the communities who are already facing the most extreme barriers to accessing healthcare more generally are those who are also facing the brunt of the bans on abortion care. And so, of course, that is, a broad category, but these two coincide. Those who are already facing healthcare injustices are at the forefront of who are facing the injustices of these abortion bans. So in, Kansas and Oklahoma, we know that rural communities are often those who are unable to, or face the most challenges, I should say, in accessing this care because there aren't providers in that area, or they need to travel great distances to receive this health care. Now, 1 in 4 women, and we know that it is not only women who have abortion care, will have an abortion at some point in their lifetime. And so this is a very common and safe healthcare procedure. And Trust Women wholeheartedly believes that it should be available in every single community. We need to keep abortions local. And so, having more clinics in more places would be one, mechanism of, combating the struggles that we are facing right now. So certainly, rural communities and the lack of providers in certain parts of the United States is one issue, and is contributing to those who are facing struggles or barriers, in accessing this healthcare. We also know that those who, have lower incomes are also those who are facing the brunt of these restrictions, be it, the travel costs, the costs of the actual abortion, childcare, being able to take time off of work to be able to go to an appointment, and so on. We also know that, this is more challenging for those who are single parents. As I stated before, 7 out of 10 of our patients are already parents, and being able to have childcare so that, the patient could go to their appointment is another barrier. And I'll also say that, we know that the systemic factors that contribute to communities of color is also, a real difficulty that is causing some communities of color to face the brunt of these restrictions. We also, I think it's important to note that, and this isn't just for trust women, but across for many different abortion providers, we may be the only healthcare practice that a patient comes to in their lifetime or even in the year. And so abortion clinics, of course, providing abortion care is very important, but they also serve an important role in communities to facilitate healthcare more generally. And so it's vital that we, continue to have clinics available in different parts of the country where there is a lack of other healthcare resources. Of course, I'm not saying we don't need to increase other healthcare resources, but I'm trying to highlight the important role that abortion clinics often hold in communities that are underserved.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And so my next question for you is if you could please talk about the upcoming anti-abortion ballot measure that's coming up in Kansas, and just talk some more. I believe everyone in the country who's concerned about the future of abortion access should have, among the many things we have our eyes on Kansas. Why is Kansas so important as an abortion access state? And why is this anti-abortion ballot measure so important for people to hold in their hearts?
Absolutely. This is a great question. So Kansas, as a state, our state constitution currently affirms the right to an abortion. It protects the right to have an abortion in the state. And as we know, as we face losing federal protections, it is vital that we uphold and affirm state-level protections to abortion care. Now, certainly, as Caitlin talked about and is so true, the protections of Roe and legality are not enough to actually afford true access to abortion care, but it is certainly necessary nonetheless. So in Kansas, we have a protection to the right to an abortion. This was affirmed out of a state Supreme Court case in 2019. And immediately after this ruling, anti-groups and politicians in the state sought to remove this right to an abortion from our state constitution. And what this has led to is there will be, on August 2nd of this year, there will be a ballot question posed to the voters in Kansas that essentially is asking, should we remove the right to an abortion from our state constitution? So if you are a voter in Kansas, vote no on August 2nd to protect the right to an abortion. Why is this so important? What we know is after Roe falls, Kansas will go from being the nearest abortion provider to about 500,000 people to about 7.7 million people who are, would potentially be seeking abortion care at some point in their lifetime. This is an enormous wave of people who will be seeking this essential health care outside of their own communities because it will have been banned after the loss of Roe. So Kansas, given its geographic location, will play an important point in, being a touch point where people can access this care. So we must be protecting what we have in Kansas, as well as demonstrating to other states steps that they can be taking to protect the right in their own areas. So other states could be using the protections that Kansas has in its constitution as, one model of, affirming or protecting some level of legal access to abortion care. If you are in Kansas, you can absolutely vote on August 2nd, whether you are an affiliated voter or not. And, still, if you are interested in supporting this measure and, upholding access in this important part of the region, you can go to kansasforconstitutionalfreedom.com to learn more about our campaign and other ways to get involved, even if you're not a voter in Kansas.
Thank you so much. Okay, we do need to move to Lauren, but just like with a very 30-second answer, I do want to ask, because this is so critical as you work for Trust Women and a provider, what can people do to support their local abortion clinics and providers in the post-Roe environment? What would you most like our listeners to do?
So I think donate to your local clinic or abortion funds. They do incredible work, and this is necessary to support access across the country. Make sure you are registered to vote and vote in politicians and vote on issues that are protecting choice. And then you can also, the needs vary clinic to clinic and region to region. So if you are able, contact your clinic. They may have a volunteer coordinator who has specific needs that will help that specific community. And so keep it local and ask the clinics what they need. But those are the three things: donate, register to vote, and keep it local.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mivy. So anyone with questions for Mivy, please put them in the questions tab, and I'm going to pass it over to Caitlin, who will lead us through questions with Lauren.
Thank you so much, Erin. And I'm super excited to introduce Lauren Polk, who uses she, her pronouns. She is the Senior Research Counsel at If One How, where she focuses on in-depth legal research in support of If One How's litigation and policy team and state and grassroots advocates. Prior to joining If One How, Lauren led state policy work related to reproductive health rights and justice as policy counsel at the National Partnership for Women and Families. Tracked and analyzed state bills on reproductive rights and health as a senior state legislative fellow with the Center for Reproductive Rights, worked at the intersection of reproductive justice and LGBTQ liberation as an If One How reproductive justice fellow at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and supported young people in forming healthy relationships as AmeriCorps teen advocate with Home Free. Lauren has authored and co-authored legal scholarship on constitutional standards to reproductive rights, international human rights law as it relates to assisted reproductive technology, and state harms at the intersection of immigration and abortion for young people in Texas. Welcome, Lauren. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's dive in. So for our first question, we know that healthcare providers can be sites of care, but also given our country's history of sterilization and criminalization, providers have also been the sources of harm. Can you talk about the role healthcare providers have played in criminalization and how that could change?
Yeah, of course. So unfortunately, healthcare providers have been a key cause of criminalization when it comes to self-managed abortion. And the way that this usually happens is that a person who self-manages will experience symptoms that are either perceived to require or do require further medical treatment. And so they'll go to the hospital for that care. And once there, someone they interact with will contact the authorities and tell them that that person self-managed, which then leads to an arrest, sometimes a charge, and then sometimes jail. So to be clear, this also happens in the case of miscarriages where a medical provider suspects some sort of foul play. And it's just one example. Some of you may have heard of the case of Purvi Patel. So Ms. Patel went to the hospital and told her doctor that she had a miscarriage. The doctor suspected otherwise, and so he contacted the police. He actually left the hospital in scrubs to help the police in their investigation of Ms. Patel. And in this case, the doctor was a member of a pro-life association of OB-GYNs, and so we can assume his report was motivated, at least in part, by malice toward abortion and toward Ms. Patel herself. Ms. Patel was unfortunately arrested, charged, and ultimately sent to prison for 3 years before her conviction was overturned. And this was in Indiana, where self-managed abortion is not a crime. So the prosecutor rooted around in the penal code until they found charges they felt could stick, including feticide and child endangerment. And we've seen this replicated in other states. So as one more example, Kimlicia Jones in Georgia went to the hospital after allegedly taking pills to self-manage an abortion. And in this case, the hospital's social worker called Child Protective Services on Ms. Jones, alleging child endangerment of the fetus. And though the charges against Ms. Jones were dropped, her name and the charges were splashed across the media, and it upended her life. And we also know other cases where healthcare providers have helped participate in the criminalization of their patients, but we don't always believe it's due to malice. In some cases, the healthcare providers may be confused about what they're required to report. So for example, they might believe that self-managed abortion is a crime. And in fact, self-managed abortion is only a crime in 3 states, Oklahoma, Nevada, and South Carolina. So they might believe it's a crime when in fact healthcare providers are actually rarely required under the law to report crimes. And one of the ways that If When How is trying to combat this is by training healthcare providers across the country in their mandatory reporting obligations. So letting them know what the law actually says so that the healthcare providers are fully informed on where their discretion lies and can also begin to make decisions about how they'll behave once Roe falls, as well as generally thinking deeply about the harms that the system of mandatory reporting can do to individuals, to families, and to the patient-provider relationships. And just in terms of how I believe that this might change, so one thing that we know is that as clinical abortion access decreases, and Mivy mentioned this, both births and self-managed abortions will increase. This means that more pregnant people will be forced to interact with the healthcare system, either because they have pregnancy complications, they miscarry, or they self-manage an abortion, or because the symptoms that they're having feel scary, even if they're normal. I'm thinking of things like not understanding how much bleeding might be safe with a self-managed abortion or with a miscarriage. And I just want to give a shout out to the MA hotline, so miscarriage and abortion hotline, that's mahotline.org. That is a resource that people can call if they are having a miscarriage and abortion and they have questions about the medical aspects of that miscarriage and abortion, including how much bleeding is normal. And so though self-managed abortion with pills is incredibly safe, not everyone will know or have access to pills. And so in addition to the rare complications that happen with self-managed abortion with pills, people will be presenting to the hospital after using less safe methods of self-managing as well. So healthcare providers are going to be confronted more often with pregnant people who are vulnerable to criminalization. And this will, we believe, likely lead to more criminalization of pregnant people. And that's why it's so important that everyone knows the legal rights and risks around self-managed abortion so that they're ready for this future.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it leads right into our next question, which is, as you mentioned while you were speaking, there have been many cases of criminalization from pregnancy outcomes, including self-managed abortion before. This is not new to many communities, especially Black and Brown communities and low-income folks. Can you talk about the ways in which people experience criminalization and how that's often tied to identity?
Yeah, so what we know is that what the law actually says is really only a small part of criminalization itself. So the criminalization of self-managed abortion, like all forms of criminalization in the United States, affects some people more than others because of their identities, their circumstances, and also things like where they live. The way that the law is applied is not neutral. Societal realities like racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, and ableism, just to name a few, impact who is criminalized because they impact both who is brought to the attention of law enforcement by someone else via reporting, or whether or not law enforcement actually then pay attention to that report, make an arrest, and pursue a charge. For example, a low-income person of color who self-manages an abortion later in pregnancy and then seeks medical care may be more likely to be reported to law enforcement, not just because someone in the hospital thinks it's illegal to end their own pregnancy, even if it's not. The person who's self-managed may also fall into a category of patients who regularly experience bias and distrust from the healthcare system. They may be the same person whose community is more heavily policed and over-incarcerated. We know that all oppression stems from white supremacy, and as one major example, we already know that racism and sexism are rampant in healthcare. Black women have worked hard to bring attention to disparities in reproductive healthcare in particular, like the racism revealed by maternal mortality rates, as well as a history of forced sterilization and birth control coercion. And so with all of this, it makes a lot of sense to me that many people don't trust the formal medical system to care for them and may turn to community or self-care instead. And we also have a really good example of how criminalization and mandatory reporting intersect. So data shows us that both class and race bias exist in mandated reporting, in particular as it concerns child abuse. In fact, Black and Native American families are disproportionately reported for child abuse and neglect, even though the rates of child abuse are similar across racial lines. Black children are actually twice as likely to be reported, and they're much more likely to be removed from their homes. Native American children are reported at 3 times the rate of white children, and they're also more likely to be removed. And additionally, we know that suspected child abuse is ultimately a subjective thing, meaning that it depends on the person doing the report, right? So I might see a child's bruise and suspect or assume that they got it playing, and another person might see the same bruise and suspect or assume abuse. And similar differences could exist observing a child's behavior or appearance and seeing a change there. Really, what I want to drive home is that our suspicions are based on biases that we already hold. So that makes things like child abuse statutes and really all reporting statutes really tricky to navigate, both for the people reporting and for the authorities in charge of enforcing those reports. So that is it's all a very long-winded way of saying that criminalization, as with all things involving the law, is deeply impacted by white supremacy.
Thank you so much for that thorough answer and for also bringing in the fact that when people are navigating criminalization, it's not just the carceral system, it may also be child welfare system, especially because so many people who have abortions are already parents. IFWIN has been doing a tremendous amount of work on criminalization and working to interrupt it. What resources do you have to support those navigating this new political and legal landscape?
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to hype those. So first off, I want to mention our helpline. It's reprolegalhelpline.org. And that's the primary point of access to IFWIN House resources for people who are either self-managing or thinking about self-managing. Our website includes answers to many questions in the hopes that some people will find what they need readily on the site, and it's available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin, including all of our Know Your Rights information. And people have a variety of secure options to communicate with us through the helpline, and we have interpretation services in multiple languages. If people have questions about their rights and the legal rights and risks of self-managed abortion, we provide legal information. And if they need more specific advice, we do provide confidential legal advice. If people are looking for clinic-based resources or funds to pay for an abortion, we direct them to clinics and funds in the state. And if folks are experiencing reproductive coercion or intimate partner violence, we provide referrals and resources. And if someone who had a self-managed abortion is threatened with criminal investigation or has been arrested or served a warrant, we provide representation. Or if they already have a lawyer, we offer co-counseling or consultation with their lawyer. And additionally, I personally want to mention that healthcare providers can reach out to our helpline if they're looking for technical assistance on understanding what the law is in their state. And those questions will usually be routed to me. We can't provide legal advice to healthcare providers, but we can give them legal information and we might be able to get them a referral. And additionally, I want to mention our Repro Legal Defense Fund. So that's reprolegaldefensefund.org. And that fund covers bail and it funds strong defenses like expert witness fees and court fees for people who are investigated, arrested, or prosecuted for self-managing their abortion outside a clinical setting. So this is essentially the only bail fund in the country dedicated to folks who have self-managed. And bail support will also allow people to return home. It'll allow them to reunite with their loved ones. It'll allow them to resume their caregiving responsibilities and jobs. And detention and incarceration often lead to the loss of employment, of housing, of public benefits, of parental rights, but a swift removal from jail can help significantly reduce those negative repercussions. And once free, people will also be able to have fuller and unfiltered conversations with legal counsel in order to bolster their cases. And beyond that tangible financial support, we're also hopeful that the existence of the Repro Legal Defense Fund will deter further arrests and prosecutions, because prosecutors will recognize these are profoundly cruel and unjust, or more likely that it's too politically costly to prosecute these cases. And if prosecutors aren't prosecuting, it should mean that police will be dissuaded from investigating people for self-managing an abortion. And although courts reviewing these prosecutions have generally sided with people who end their own pregnancies, by that time the consequences of criminalization have already been felt by that person and by their family. So jobs have been lost, children have been removed from homes, someone has faced the trauma of pretrial incarceration, and all of the many other ills that criminalization brings. And finally, we also think that successful legal defenses will set precedent, confirming that the law is on the side of the people self-determining their reproductive lives. We want to show law enforcement and abortion opponents that we stand united and that we're ready to free and defend those who get ensnared in the criminal punishment system's trap. So we're really excited to be able to have that resource. Obviously, we're very bummed that it needs to exist, but we're excited that we have it. And the last thing that I want to mention that we have is our judicial bypass wiki. So in most states in the US, young people are required to either notify or get consent from their parents before they obtain an abortion in a clinic. And so this website helps young people and adult helpers navigate the requirements in each state. And that is at judicialbypasswiki.ifwhenhow.org.
Wow, I just want to thank you for uplifting all those resources and doing what all of us should do, which is continue to center and really think about what those most impacted and navigating the system will need in this post-Roe landscape. We've just a few minutes, but I do want to ask you, what, if anything, can we on this call do to resist and interrupt criminalization of bodily autonomy?
Yeah, great question. So I think that in this instance, information is power. So the more that people know about what hospitals may have to report or what they might choose to report, the more power that people will hold in deciding whether or how to interact with the formal healthcare system. And similarly, the more that healthcare providers understand that self-managed abortion is typically not something they need to report, the more likely they will be to stop contributing to criminalization. And I also want to echo everything Mivy said. So one of the best things you can do to stay in this fight is to be on the email list of and donate to reproductive justice, reproductive rights, reproductive health organizations, and abortion funds near you. So abortion, as we've mentioned several times today, but it bears repeating, it's not going to stop because it becomes more difficult to access. And these organizations are a really great way to ensure that you know what's going on at the state level with access to care, as well as finding ways to plug in locally. And lastly, but certainly not least, please join up with efforts to fight white supremacy and racism happening in your state, understanding that oppressions are interlocking, and spreading that knowledge will be really a big key to creating a different world where abortion bans and abortion stigma are not allowed to exist.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And I don't know if we lost Caitlin. Caitlin, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute.
All good. All good. Okay, I will take it back. Thank you so much. Please plug into our work. So first of all, we have a bevy of information about self-managed abortion with pills at reproaction.org. /SMA, or you can easily just go to reproaction.org. And in fact, we're very excited. We're going to be putting up a new page shortly, touching on a topic that Lauren raised that specifically people maybe don't know what may not have clarity on when they may need to seek additional medical care after self-managing an abortion. So we get a little more gritty and granular, and we'll be providing that information shortly. Also encourage you to follow us on social media. We're Reproaction on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please sign up for our email list. If you go to reproaction.org, you can sign up for our emails. We run these Act and Learn webinars every single month, and they are free and open to the public. And you will always get an invitation to join if you sign up for our email list. So please save the date for our next month's webinar, which will be on Monday, July 25th at noon Eastern, holding big tech accountable for suppressing abortion. And let me just say, as a point of personal privilege, this is a huge issue. So that intersects very directly with the topics we're discussing today, and is it going to be a major front on our battle to make sure that folks are able to access the abortion care they need. Facebook has been suppressing our information about self-managed abortion with pills. Facebook has been suppressing our World Health Organization information that we've been sharing about self-managed abortion with pills. So, and we're not alone in that. In fact, I'm co-facilitating a closed meeting at RightsCon tomorrow about that. So with others in the space who are supporting folks who are self-managing abortion. So this is a critical topic. We really hope you'll join us next Monday. And with that, we'll go to Q&A. Before we do that, I also want to just underscore something that Lauren just said, and really thank Lauren for drawing the connection to racism and the importance of anti-racist and racial justice work to this fight for abortion access. We know that the modern anti-abortion movement as it exists today stemmed from the fact that segregationism was falling out of favor and the right wing wanted a new tool. We also know that, and it's important to know that gender oppression and racial oppression are intersecting, and that at its root, what we are fighting is white supremacy, and specifically a drive to control gender and sexuality in service of white supremacy, so there are more white babies being born. There's absolutely no doubt that that is what our opponents want, and they're more openly embracing it, with white nationalist groups like Patriot Front openly being welcomed and marching in places like March for Life. And so I just want to really thank Lauren for bringing that up. And we also know that these restrictions most harm people of color, and that is part of the design as well. So let's start with a question here. I've got one. Saw a blurb on the line about the possibility that if someone suffers a miscarriage, that depending on what caused the miscarriage, that there could be some sort of punishment meted out. Can this be? Are in fact people being prosecuted for miscarriage? And the answer is yes. But Lauren, what else would you like to add to that conversation with your expertise?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that it's important for people to be aware of, that whenever pregnant people are criminalized, it's not going to stop at just one reason, right? Like, it's not going to stop because, even if abortion is legal in a state, right? Like, abortion stigma is a big reason why people are being criminalized. And so, if someone comes into the hospital after miscarrying, and that particular state has, an abortion ban, and that healthcare provider is anti-abortion, right? They might be sort of looking for reasons that this person might have done something suspicious, right? They might feel like it's their duty to report this person to the authorities. Or, they might just be confused. They might think, oh, well, I think that this person did something wrong. It's my responsibility to report it, and that way I won't lose my medical license, right? Like, so these are things that we're worried about, and they're things that are already happening. People have been arrested in the United States for their miscarriages, for stillbirths, and for self-managed abortion. So this is something that's already happening, and the reason that it happens is because of, like Erin said, white supremacy, and also because of abortion stigma. That people are really, they are wary of certain types of pregnancy outcomes. And obviously, there's also a lot of misogyny in the medical field, right? People are suspicious of women and the way that they self-report. People are suspicious of trans folks and the way that they self-report. So these are things that we expect will continue to happen and to increase. And we also know this because we've seen it happening in other countries, right? In countries where abortion is outlawed, there are plenty of people in jail after having miscarriages or stillbirths, in addition to people in jail for having abortions.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it, Lauren. So the next question and it comes from Caitlin, and not Caitlin, the presenter, Caitlin, a participant, who's asking, do you anticipate some states will try to more strictly regulate misoprostol, or is that just not possible since it isn't already subject to the regulatory restrictions on mifepristone and is commonly used for medical indications? So I'll take a first stab at that. And if anyone else, whether it's our Caitlin Bloody, the panelist, or Mivi or Lauren would like to jump in, feel free to do so. But yes, the questioner is accurate that misoprostol is a much less restricted drug than mifepristone. And the great news is that misoprostol on its own is also extremely effective for self-managing abortion when using the World Health Organization protocol. And that's part of why Reproaction shares it far and wide. And we will keep repeating it over and over and over so people have the information. So it would be really challenging to make it more restricted because it is used for a variety of other causes, including arthritis and ulcer management. So at this time, there are just not those restrictions on it. Now, to this question, you know, I wouldn't count out abortion opponents on anything. They've been trying to restrict any number of things that have nothing to do with abortion. So one needs to stay on their toes. But if anyone, other panelists would like to talk about that, please jump in.
So I think we've seen in the past in pre-Roe criminal bans that the way that the law is worded is that they basically say that if anyone uses any drug to induce an abortion, it's a crime. So I think that that may be one of the ways that anti-abortion folks try to, you know, without regulating meso directly, try to make it harder for folks to access that for that specific service. But I do think, Erin, that you're right, that it's going to be harder for them to do that than it is for them to regulate mifepristone. But yeah, I don't put anything past them. They're very creative, and they really hate us. So they will try whatever they can in order to reduce access to abortion and also to further stigmatize the procedure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. My next question, I'd ask, Mivi, we're getting some questions about waiting periods. And in particular, can you speak a little more to why waiting periods are so harmful to people who need to access abortion care and why that's going to be even more harmful in a post-Roe environment?
Sure. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question is just why waiting periods are so harmful and onerous for abortion care. So for example, if somebody has a 24, 48, or 72-hour waiting period, why they are so onerous. Sometimes it sounds like it's not that big of a deal, but why are they so harmful, and what additional concerns do you have in a post-Roe environment for waiting periods?
Thank you. Yes. So one of the reasons that, you know, these waiting periods exist at all is to dissuade people from actually having the abortion care. And, you know, the waiting periods vary state to state. Some states don't have them at all, and other states have 24, 48, or 72 hours, like you mentioned, Erin. And so part of it is, you know, in states where there are these waiting periods, often information is passed along that is intentionally designed to dissuade the patient from actually coming back and receiving the abortion care. And so it is, you know, very manipulative and harmful to the patient in that regard. It also can mean that sometimes, you know, people are able to, you know, receive this information over the phone and then, you know, without having to come into the office beforehand, but that's not always true. In some places, you have to physically come into the physician's office to have this, you know, information read to you before you can begin the waiting period. And so that, you know, poses another barrier to people who are needing to come into the physical physician's office multiple times for initial paperwork and consult and ultrasound, and then coming in a subsequent time for the abortion to actually take place. And so this just, one, there's the dissuasion aspect, but then it's also this logistical barrier that causes this. And I imagine in certain states that they will continue to find different practices like this to, continue to make it more and more difficult for those who are seeking abortion care. But I think in other states, if we can start to push back against these sort of practices that open up access by pushing against these laws, that would be, a really great step in facilitating people being able to access care and not being dissuaded or manipulated in their choice. This is tangentially related, but I think there's another question that is coming up around the legality or varied legality of telemedicine and what that can mean to facilitate access for people who do need to engage with medical providers to have their abortion care. And so I think that can be another interesting aspect that can either facilitate or prohibit depending upon people's state as to what sort of care they can receive.
Thank you so much. And we are at time. We have so many questions remaining. I want to thank everyone who's been here, and we will see you in the streets. So thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.